All right. Hold up a minute. It's been a while, hasn't it? So first thing I want to say is, I'm terribly sorry for the radio silence on my end. I've made a few posts on Twitter and Discord, but I understand not everyone are checking those platforms. And also, a lot of people are just looking at the feed and they just see an episode hasn't been uploaded in a long time. So before we get into the meat of things, I should probably explain to you guys what happened to the show. At the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020 was when our last episode was released. It was our Christmas special, and normally after that, it is followed by a New Year's special, or a year in review, where we look back on all the updates that we saw in the past year. Well, of course, that didn't happen. Well, it sort of did. Myself and Magpie did sit down, and we recorded a solid 3 or 4 hour episode. This was a big episode, and there was going to be a ton of work to put it together. So I'm going to back up a little bit to September of 2019. As many of you know, I'm in school for radio broadcasting, and in September, I started interning for a fairly large podcast network in Canada. It was cool. I got to work with some pretty big names in Canadian podcasting, and I learned a lot about the industry. I was also producing several different shows for them each week, as sort of to build up my portfolio for finding a job after things were done. So I found myself, I was spending a ton of time working on a bunch of different podcasts, which was great. It was awesome. Don't get me wrong. I loved it. I was getting better as a content creator. My production skills and writing ability and presentation ability had all been improving. At least I hope. I was also building a portfolio that would help me find a job once this was all done. Now, the issue was, I was starting to get burnt out of RuneScape. All of my goals in-game were starting to feel like a waste of time, and I wasn't really enjoying the actual gameplay of RuneScape. And setting goals and completing them is basically what the game is all about. And it's always been that way, hasn't it? So I had goals like 96 fishing for some Master Elite Diaries. That's how long it's been. I was cracking away on my Elite Diaries, and that requires some really high skills, or that requires some really high levels in certain skills. Which is kind of funny when I look back on it, that I pushed through to 91 rune crafting, but then I gave up like 2 or 3 levels shy of 96 fishing. So I was starting to get bored, and I found myself playing the game less and less, and when I was playing, quite often I wasn't really having fun. But what I was enjoying, and what actually did keep me playing for months, were you guys, the friends I had made, and all the amazing people who I hang out with in Discord and CC. And another factor I feel like that played a part in this was RuneFest. Some of you might remember I did a live stream where I watched the entire event. I had Magpie join me to give commentary on what was going on. And we also had Zyras, who was live on the scene, and he would dial into the stream to give us updates on what was going on the grounds of RuneFest. That was awesome. I had a total blast. That was really an amazing weekend. But there was one thing I was a little disappointed, I guess. And that was the Old School RuneScape 2020 update reveals. I did voice my disappointment about them when it happened, but I feel like that played a larger part in how I started slowing down playing the game. Now, the Nightmare of Ashiyama, it looks cool. It looked like a lot of fun. Even now, I haven't actually done it yet, but I want to. I've seen videos. It looks like a fun boss. But that was only one boss that was announced at RuneFest. Sure, they had a new master level quest. They were going to finish completing, is it a Hollowvale or Darkmire? They're going to complete that area. Again, really cool. I love questing in this game, but that was just one quest. And that was filling out an area that, it already had some content added to it. We all expected the desert to get a new update. For some reason, it didn't. And I think we all know why. That's totally okay. We had Group Iron Man. That looks cool. Looks great. Some people would love that. But for me, I wasn't really planning on participating in that. And then there was the Clan Chat update. You know what? This is something I was really excited for, and I've been waiting for years. I have people who would message me asking about, hey, how can I get a better rank in the CC? And for a long time, my answer was always like, I just really want to wait for the new clan chat update because I don't want to give ranks to people and then have to take them away at some point. Or, it can get, that sucks. So what I kind of noticed was happening, I was beginning to get bored of my main. All my goals began to become quite steep. I'm getting from level 94 to level 95 fishing. That's a big job. And unless you're willing to 1 or 2 tick fish, you're going to spend a lot of time AFKing. And, you're going to want something to do on the side. And if you don't have something to do on the side, that's not a fun goal to work on. So, my goals for my main were becoming quite steep. And I also felt like there weren't really many updates coming in 2020 that I was super excited for. Nothing really to look forward to. So as each month went on, I noticed I was playing less and less. This is coupled with me being pretty busy with school and work and the internship, all that stuff as well. All right, so let's fast forward to January 1st, 2020. This is when I had the New Year's episode ready and ready to be assembled. But at the same time, this was also my final semester of school. I was juggling 2 jobs on top of everything else. And I was starting to make plans on how exactly I was going to find a job in podcasting. The industry is quite competitive, so I had to figure out ways to set myself ahead of someone else. So each week, I found myself not having enough time for all these things that I was doing, and I had to decide on what I was going to postpone. Since I was starting not to play RuneScape that much anymore, I decided to postpone the podcast episode, which at first was just 1 week. I told myself, you know what? Couple days, I'll do it on the weekend, which when the weekend came, I got busy with work, I got busy with other stuff, and I had to postpone it for another week. Have you ever had a task, maybe like cleaning out your car? You keep putting it off, and day after day, the car continues to get worse and more messy. And then it gets to a point where you don't even want to look at it because the reminder that you need to clean it was starting to get overwhelming. Or another example I have is maybe your bank account is getting kind of low on funds. You have bills to pay, but there's also some, you want to buy some takeout. So you continue to spend money, and instead of addressing the problem of your bank account running low, you just simply don't look at your bank account and you just keep piling on that credit card. You do this just to simply avoid any anxiety and stress. Well, I started doing that with the podcast. Each week would pass, and each week it would become harder and harder for me to sit down and actually open it to work on it. But in my head, I told myself this is something I had to do. I had been doing this for 3 or 4 years at this point. The New Year's episode is something that I got excited for, and it's a big episode. And I was excited to put it together and put it out. I had you guys waiting for it, but I also had Magpie, who just spent 4 hours of his own time sitting down to record this with me. It wasn't fair to you guys just to not get that episode, and it also wasn't fair to Magpie to spend that time for no return. It was a literal waste of time for him. And well, with each week passing, anytime I thought about editing it, I got more anxiety. Browsing Discord started to stress me out because so much time had passed, I hadn't even given an explanation on what happened, and I felt any explanation that I did give wouldn't give it justice. So I decided to step back from the game and the show, and I kind of came to terms that this episode would not be released. Not only that, but I came to the terms that no episode would be released anytime soon. Which was hard. This is the first time that had ever happened for the show. So that's pretty much what happened. I stopped playing RuneScape. I started working on different podcasts. I started playing different video games. And as the weeks and months went on, I started to miss the people I became good friends with. The people I would hang out and talk with every night on this game. I started missing the community that we had, and it was weird because I started to feel like I was no longer part of that community. So for the first time in months, I logged into RuneScape. And I was surprised to see that the clan chat hadn't died. It still had the same awesome people from before, and it actually had some new and awesome people who had joined. I started to get that old school RuneScape itch again, and I wanted to come back to the show. And right now, with this pandemic and COVID-19 going on, I don't have a job. And no school because, well, that actually just finished. So I figured this was the best time to do an updated episode of the show. All right, I guess the best time would have been like 4 months ago, but you know the saying, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday, the second best time is today. So here we are. Now don't get me wrong, this is not me saying the show is back to its weekly format right now, but what I am saying is I definitely want to continue with the show again. This show has been monumental in shaping my life. Seriously. It sounds silly, but I started the show back in 2016 because I loved this game and I loved podcasts, and I found there wasn't really any RuneScape podcasts to listen to. Well, there was RuneScape 3 podcasts to listen to, and those were great, but I don't play RuneScape 3. Old school RuneScape was lacking in that department, and I could never figure out why. That's so strange. If you listen back into some older episodes, I've always talked about how strange there wasn't a shit ton of podcasts for this game. Destiny had like 3 or 4 podcasts, and they got an update like once every 4 months. So it made no sense to a game that got updated weekly that didn't have a podcast. Especially when the YouTube community is YouTube and Twitch is massive for this game. Strange stuff. I know there was a couple podcasts, like the Hexus podcast on YouTube, but my problem was, one, it was on YouTube, and that killed my data consumption. And second, while the show is a good show and I do enjoy it, it's not really the format of a podcast that I typically enjoyed. So I decided, myself and Deegan, let's create the Wilderness Podcast. I looked at other podcasts that I really liked and the format that they used, and well, I guess I sort of copied them. But let's not call it copy, we'll call it inspired and influenced, because that's really what it was. There's a podcast called The Instance Podcast. It's a World of Warcraft show. And when I go back and listen to it, there's a lot of different segments that they had that I kind of got inspired for. Stuff like talking about the lore and all that jazz. And then there's the Giant Bombcast. It's a general gaming podcast, but again, a lot of influences came from that show. They opened every show talking about what they did in the gaming world that week, and then they went into the news. I look at the Wilderness Podcast, and that's pretty much how it is, isn't it? And there's other shows like the Sick and Wrong Podcast, Jay and Silent Bob Get Old, maybe even Joe Rogan. These are all huge influences on the show. So me and my brother Deegan, we started planning the show in July of 2016. And then a couple months later, in September, we thought, you know what, we're ready to record and release our first episode. It's funny, I still remember hitting 100 downloads. I lost my goddamn mind. I remember dancing around my little living room computer area. And then, you know what, here we are today. And I think we're sitting around, like 10,000 downloads a month? It's fucking insane. Never thought I would actually get to that, but that's crazy. Anyways, so while I was doing this show back in 2016, I was also working a job in construction. I would come home from work, sit, and start working on the podcast. We would record on a Sunday night, and I would spend Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday editing it. Every Wednesday, I remember I'd stay up until 1 or 2 a.m. to make sure it was finally uploaded before I went to bed, so it was released for Thursday morning. And this beat the shit out of me when it came on to Thursday morning, especially with a highly manual labor job like construction. But I actually loved it. It gave me something to look forward to. It basically just gave me purpose, because I was in this job that I wasn't necessarily enjoying and wasn't really sure where my life was going. So yeah, the show took a lot of my time. I kind of had high standards for the show. And what I mean is editing out the ums and uhs and all that stuff. And yeah, if you listen to the earlier episodes and maybe even midway through to the newer episodes, there's a ton of ums and uhs. And this is after I removed a bunch of them. But you know what? It mattered to me because when I listened to podcasts, I didn't hear that stuff. The conversations were usually tight. Not like Joe Rogan where it's live, but a lot of these other shows, they were conversational, but you don't know how much editing is actually involved to make the conversation tight, especially when it's like a 3-hour show. So years went by, and I started realizing I don't want to work construction forever. Now, it wasn't a bad job, but it just wasn't for me. So I decided it's time to go back to school for a job that would be more meaningful for me. So I decided to apply for school, and I signed up for a youth social work program. Or maybe it was just some personal support worker program. But something to do with that, something to do in the social work realm. And what happened was that program was actually full, so I had to choose a backup. And I thought, you know what? I like podcasting. I listen to podcasts. This one's been pretty fun to do. Let's try out radio broadcasting. We'll use that as a backup. So, went to school for radio. And as that schooling went on, I started to realize, hey, you know what? I'm actually not terrible at this. And the prospect of actually making a career out of podcasting started to seem possible. And then I started to work in my internship, where I started to put together these shows that had a whole team of people working on it. That took a ton of research to come up with the content. And it had a huge script to go along with it. It had a bunch of music beds, had a bunch of interviews. I started working with some pretty big names when it comes to, well, at least when it comes to Canadian podcasting. So it's not quite a Joe Rogan, but if you live in Ontario, or maybe even all of Canada, you might be familiar with names like Alan Cross and Fearless Fred. And these were names that I was familiar with growing up, and to actually be able to work with some of them was crazy. So here I am today. While I don't actually have a job in podcasting, I do now have a portfolio, and I'm pretty confident that it will help me find a job somewhere in the podcast world. But honestly, I owe it all to you guys. If I didn't get the love and support from you guys in the early days, I honestly don't know if I would have continued. So thank you for that. And thank you for the continued love and support. It's fucking rad. So yeah, RuneScape. I want to boss again. I want to do raids. I want to try out the Nightmare of Ashiyama. I want to do those events that we used to do in the CC, like Trivia Night and Drop Parties and Booley's Blacksmith giveaways, all of those events. I want to continue building up my peer to PvP with. I also kind of want to start streaming more. I want to play my Iron Man and maybe even play my PvP World only Iron Man. But I also want to podcast again. Now, I do have a problem with being over-ambitious. I mean, there's a ton of projects that I mentioned on the show in the past that just never happened because I tend to bite off more than I can chew quite often. But this is something I'm working on. I am fully aware of it, and I'm trying to avoid it. So right now, instead of saying, yeah, I'm going to play RuneScape every day and going to start podcasting every week, I am going to say that I'm going to play my main more often, and I hope to hop back onto this podcast as soon as I can. Again, this is not me saying we're returning to the weekly format, but I'm also not ruling that one out. Because let's be real, I won't be able to spend 15 hours a week working on each episode like I used to. That being said, over the past few months, I have improved, and I'm a much better podcaster than I were back in the old days. At least I hope so. Imagine it turns out I've actually gotten worse over the past few months. That would suck. What a waste of money. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure what else to say, but yeah, I feel like this update was, I mean, obviously it was needed. It was a long time coming. And like 4 months to work on this, really. So thank you guys. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your support. And thank you for the kindness. Like, I'm serious when I say this is literally the best community I've ever seen on this game. And I've tried to get into a bunch of other communities before this podcast, and I don't know. But this community has been awesome, has been so much fun, so many great friends. I've actually met some of you guys in real life. We've talked, we've gamed together. I've seen somebody come into the CC to ask for advice about a problem, a real life problem. I remember this guy, he came in once and he just had a child, and the child, I think, shit all over his couch. He didn't know what to do. He's a single father. And we have a bunch of other single fathers and single parents in the CC, and they all said, hey man, we've been there. Here's our advice on how we did it. That was fucking awesome. I still remember that. I have so many great memories like that. And it's not me who created this community. It's really you guys. So all I'm going to say is take care for now. And I'll probably see you guys in game. Because remember, the wild boys and wild gals, they're for life.